we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 50, the very end of that story. And before I read it, I need to make a little bit of a confession. I actually debated whether I was going to share this story a little bit. Something that happened to me on Tuesday. I'll tell you in a minute. Then it happened again to me on Friday. And I said, okay, I have to. I was literally driving down the road. Plus, I talk about traffic a lot, too, driving. But, guys, I've driven in New York City. And I have never driven around people that are, like, so certain that they're never going to make it home that they make sure that they might not. So Tuesday, you guys know Tuesday, right? We had whiteout conditions. Couldn't see the road, and I was driving. I'm not going to tell you where in case you're the one. But I was on a 2-lane road, and of course you can't see the road, and it hadn't been plowed in a bit, and it was still coming down, and you couldn't see a quarter mile down the road because of the whiteout, and I had stopped, and so I was building up speed, and of course I got a little front wheel drive. You can't floor it, just take off in that thing. You kind of got to press slowly, or you're just going to spin. So I'm going, and I get going through the intersection. I'm moving on, and this dude below, by this point I'm going like 30, which I thought was reasonable given the weather. Guy goes right around me, just blows right past me, and I got to reveal. I didn't want to tell you this, but I got to reveal to you what is sometimes in my heart and my soul. I thought, I hope I see you in a ditch. I don't know if I'm the only one. Probably not. But, and of course, then literally I was thinking, should I tell that story? I'm driving down here on Friday. I was getting onto 131, like on the on-ramp, coming down, and there's this guy behind me. So I get onto 131 and I move over, and he goes around me on the right, still on the on-ramp. I'm like in the lane now, and he passes me and whips him. I didn't have quite the same reaction because I've been thinking about this since Tuesday. So maybe God is at work. But what that made me think is that there are times, right? We can be silly and it's talking about traffic, but there are times that people do something, that we experience something, maybe from someone else or just from the world, that makes us so angry that we just want to lash out, that we want to see vengeance, that we want to see people get what they deserve, right? And this got me thinking, I want to do something else that I do too much. I'm going to talk about Lord of the Rings. I just finished reading it again, like all 3 of them. I just finished them, and I was like, something came to me, though, that I was like, I don't think I've ever noticed this before when I've read it. Now, if you've seen the movies, and I just assume everybody's seen the movies by now. Come on. Anyway, if you've seen the movies, and you probably even be familiar with this moment if you haven't, there's this woman named Éowyn. She is the niece of King Theoden, the king of Rohan, and in the movie, you see her. She's kind of portrayed as sort of the girl power hero. There's that climactic scene in the story, according to Peter Jackson films it, sort of the big moment for Éowyn is the moment that she stabs the Witch King in the face. He says, "No man can kill me." She stabs him in the face, says, "I am no man," right? You guys know, right? Yeah, that's that moment. It's a climactic moment. And that is sort of the way Peter Jackson portrays her story. That is her high point. But what's interesting is that's not at all the way Tolkien portrays her story. As a matter of fact, if you read her story in the books, that moment, which is verbatim from the books, I am no man, might be her low point. Because the way Tolkien portrays her story, if you read it, she's had a hard life. And you get glimpses of this in the movie, where she's had to kind of take care of a aging old man, and she just feels like she's been mistreated. She's angry. She's rightfully angry because most of her suffering can be blamed on Saruman or others, right? She has had a hard life, and her response to that is to, what she says this in the book, she wants to die on a field of glory, taking out as many people as she can with her. Like, that is her dream. And she's holding on. That anger and that bitterness that she has lived through is fueling her drive out there on the fields of Pelennor, where she kills the Witch King, right? That is what is driving her. And what you don't see in the movie is she's actually seriously injured, almost ends her story right there. She is very injured in that battle. And she goes to this place in Gondor called the Houses of Healing. And it's there that she has this conversation with Faramir. Remember Faramir? The steward's son, right? Faramir's a wonderful, wonderful guy. He gets short shift in the movie too. But Faramir says to her, and they have these conversations about her heart and her anger and her bitterness. And it's easy to see why it didn't make it into the movie, because, it's a lot of talking and it's not real dramatic. But in these conversations, one of the things Faramir says is, because she's talking to him about, what a great soldier he is. And he says to her, I don't love the sword. I love what the sword protects. And I think that's a key moment. I think it's a key moment in her story too, because then she says, I will no longer be a shield maiden. I will no longer be a warrior. I will no longer be a soldier. I will lay down the sword and I will care for things that grow. And for Tolkien, that is her high moment. That is the moment that she is healed, and the moment that she begins to have a whole new life of freedom. I think we missed some of that in the movie, though I understand why. Now, if that's hard to hear, and if you think I just said, girl power is bad, I didn't at all. I think it appeals to us, not so much for the girl power dynamic as the we got to mete out justice and vengeance, passion that we have in our culture. And I'm going to suggest to you that what Moses presents here, what Tolkien presents in his story, is that the way that we need to live as people of the kingdom of God is to lay down our sword and to care for things that grow. This is what I think it looks like. Consider, we're going to look at Joseph, Genesis 50. I'll read his story in a minute. But I want to bring us up to speed. Now, if you've been reading along, let's see, I've got one of those things right here. If you have one of these, and you've been reading along either online or on the thing with the chronological reading, you've probably gotten a lot of his story. You might know his story. Maybe you learned it in Sunday school, or you've seen Joseph in the many-colored Technicolor Dreamcoat adventure, whatever that's called. You might know his story a little bit. But just let's bring him up to speed. He's his dad's favorite, right? He grows up, he's a favorite son, and if anything, his story ought to show us why parents shouldn't pick favorites. He has the fancy coat. He likes to brag to his brothers about how great he is and tells them about how one day you're all going to bow down to me. Literally says this to his brothers. That could not have gone well. And turns out it didn't, because they get mad at him, they debate murdering him, and they decide, no, let's at least profit off of him, so we'll sell him into slavery. This is what happens. And then, of course, he rises to prominence, right? In Potiphar's house, he becomes like the executive director of the household, and he's falsely accused of something he didn't do and goes to prison. There's this funny scene when he's in prison. You might have read it if you've been reading along, where he interprets the dreams, right? And the cupbearer goes back to Pharaoh, and Joseph at this point, I think it's in Genesis chapter 40. Yeah, Genesis 40. At this point, when this happens, Joseph is still trying to manage, because he says to the cupbearer, he says, hey, when you go back to Pharaoh, mention my name, right? Keep me in mind. Tell Pharaoh all about what I did for you. He's trying to save himself from prison. He's always managed. We talked about that a little bit last week. Always trying to keep our hands on the control, right? He's still managing. And then I think the next line says the cupbearer goes back to Pharaoh, totally forgets about Joseph. Silence. And Joseph sits in, the long, dark night of the soul, where he has no answers. Maybe he's not as special as he thought he was. Because I think from that moment forward, we don't get a lot, we get glimpses, but I think something changed, right? The rest of his story, we know how it goes. Pharaoh finally has a dream. The cupbearer's like, oh, yeah, I remember this guy. And so Joseph goes, and what Joseph says to Pharaoh, he says, I think this is in the next chapter, but it's many years later. What Joseph says to Pharaoh is, it is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh what he wants. Right? He acknowledges, I don't have the answers. That's the first thing he says. I don't really know, but God will do it. And I think there's something changes, and then, of course, he stewards Egypt, basically becomes prime minister, helps save the Middle East from a massive famine. His brothers come, and there's that whole scene, which is great, and essentially he just forgives them. Long story short, it's not just forgives them. It's a bit of a thing there. It's worth checking out if you haven't been reading along, but that's where we are. And then, from that moment, about 15 to 17 years, I think, go by, and Dad dies. And they go off with a whole bunch of Egyptians and priests and Egyptian leaders and the family and all the brothers and their wives and their kids, and they all go off 100 miles or so, and they bury Jacob, and then they all come back, and then this is what we read in Genesis chapter 50. I think all of that context helps, because otherwise you're like, but why? Bless you. Okay. Verse 15 of chapter 50 of Genesis. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. Now, they've been living in peace for about 15, 17 years. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. Now, just to be clear, their dad said no such thing. They're making this up. Okay, that's important. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, and I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Few things. We're a few observations, a few sort of key things that we can kind of take away from this passage. The first thing that I see is that we human creatures are very prone to try to manufacture our own safety. We work hard to make sure that we are safe. Doesn't really work. See what the brothers are doing? They're like making up lies, like, oh no. They think, in their worldview, they think that now that Dad's gone, Joseph's going to get them. And Joseph's got power. I mean, he is second in command in Egypt. He can make a couple of phone calls and have them all run out of town, right? They know it. And they think the only reason he hasn't done something to us already is because Daddy wouldn't like it. And now that Daddy's gone, we're in trouble. And so they start making up these stories, right? They're trying to manufacture their safety. In a way, that's what Eowyn was doing, right? As long as she was in control, if she had her hand on the sword, then she knew all of that anger, all of that bitterness, all of that fear was in her hands, and she could lash out, and she could take down as many orcs as she could before she lost it, right? That for her, that was a way of making her feel safe, of feeling protected in some ways. It's not any different from like my impulse. I hope I'm not alone. When you see somebody blow past you and it really isn't safe, if you do see them in a ditch, 1.5 miles, 2 miles down the road, then at least there's some justice in the world. I'm not just going slow for no good reason, first of all, right? People get I can be safe because I know the universe works out the way it should. And Let's be honest. It doesn't always, right? Sometimes there is just injustice. Things don't go right. And when I try to manufacture my own safety through, call it karma, for lack of a better word, sometimes I get let down. It doesn't work. People don't always get what they deserve. Actions don't always get equal and opposite reactions. Not in the moral universe. If you jump off the roof, you might break your leg, but if you cheat, you might not get caught. That's one way I think we try to make ourselves feel safe. One thing that I've come to realize is that all of us, and I'm convinced, the one about the driver I'm not going to put on you. This one I'll put on you. I think all of us go to our loved ones, our family members, our friends, the people who are actually closest to us, right? With one question in our hearts. And that question is, am I loved? Right? And when we feel like we're not getting the kind of love that we want, we usually try to force a way to feel safe, don't we? Maybe that's fighting, arguing. Maybe that's manipulation. We try to make ourselves feel safe. What if instead of coming to them with the question, am I loved, we went to them with the question, yes, you are. Right? What if instead of coming needy to the people that we're close to, wanting to know, do you love me? What if we came to those people instead of seeking something from them, we went hoping to give something to them instead? What if we could live that way? Instead of trying to make ourselves feel safe, we depend on someone else to do it. It's the only way it tends to work out. You seen anything in the news lately that made you bitter, angry, want to lash out? What do you do to feel safe? What are you doing to manufacture your safety? How are you grabbing the sword? Who do you want to mete out justice upon? It doesn't matter what your ideological background, what your viewpoint is. Every headline, look. If I were going to write a news article about a basketball player that missed a shot, right, today, right now, in the current world we live in, the headline would say, unnamed player messes up big time and makes everybody mad. Right? Because I want to know who. You didn't tell me that in the headline. What is all this drama about? Why is everybody so mad? Right? Click. You know why they do that? Because every time you click, they make money. And you don't click when you're happy. You click when you're mad. You click when you're angry. You click when you're scared. Click, 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 click. They're making money. And it doesn't matter what ideology. Everybody does it. We are being discipled to grab the sword and go to war by our news feeds. And when I said the plumb line gets out of whack, that gets our plumb line out of whack. That's what we're not made. We're not made to do that. But we feel scared. We feel angry. We feel like our world is in jeopardy. And we don't know what to do to keep ourselves safe. And so we grab the sword because that's what we're so used to doing. That's what humanity is so used to doing. Now, there are two responses that we see in this text to a messy, uncertain world. This is the other point, if you're taking notes. But, of course, the first response is kind of what we've just seen. Protect yourself. In verse 18, they do something that I found very interesting. They come to him and they bow down and they put their head on the floor. We're your servants. Now, psychologists tell you, when you feel under threat, and that could be real threat, like threat to life, or relational threat, or you're scared of something, there are typically 4 responses that we generally fall into. You've heard some of these, I'm sure. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. It's almost a tongue twister. Fight, I'm going to punch you, right? Or sometimes that's less physical and more argumentative, but fight, flight, we run away. Freeze, and people do that, right? They're under threat, they just freeze up. And then fawn, which is sort of like peacemaking, which is like, oh, you're great. No. About once a year or so with our consistory, we kind of do a training on dealing with conflict, not as a uh-oh moment, but just as we need to have this baseline so we all understand that. One of the things we talk about in that is, if the middle, when there's difficulty between people, if the middle is truth and love, here's what is true and I love you. That's sort of what we're going for, right? And there's a whole way we can change. But on one side of that, you would have what we call fawn. Oh, I don't matter. You're wonderful. Everything you said is true, right? A lot of people do that. That's what they are doing here. On the other side of that, on the other extreme, you have like fighting. I am going to punch you out. You don't matter. Nothing you said, only my way, right? Those are two of extremes of how we can. One is basically self-harm in a way, like I don't matter. And the other is others harm. You don't matter. When we're aiming for that middle thing. And when we're under threat, we tend to go, if we're not careful, into some of these other ways of dealing with fear and threat. Where do you typically go when you feel your blood pressure rise? Like when someone when you've gone to them with the question, am I loved? Right? Under the surface, and you didn't get the answer that you wanted, where do you typically tend to go? Do you fight? Hey, love me. I'm going to shake you until you love me. You go after them. Do you chase them? Do you do what I do? I'm just going. You guys have fun. Flight is my MO. You guys deal with that. I'm going to be in my office. I'll close my door. Right? We can do that. Or maybe you fawn like they did. I don't matter. Whatever you say, we're your servants. That's what they do. What does Joseph do? The first thing he does is in verse 18. He weeps. It's the first thing that Joseph does. And there's a lot of speculation in what I'm going to say. But I really do think, as we look at his story, that Joseph changed a long time ago. I think Joseph is no longer so arrogant. He's no longer so controlling. He's no longer so commanding. I think he actually forgave his brothers when he forgave them, when he said he forgave them like 15, 17 years ago. I think he did. And now he realizes that however much he thought everything was fine, they don't. That for 15 years, they've lived in fear of him. And maybe he's changed, right? And he just didn't restore the relationship the way it needed to be restored. And he's come to realize the depth of the heart. They come to him. Joseph could have said, have you been listening to what the Egyptians have said? What are you thinking? Why would you think that I'm going to hurt you? Have you guys been gossiping about me for 15 years? Like, he could have pointed a lot of fingers. Some of that sounds familiar. You just don't understand me. Why didn't you bring this up earlier, right? So many things he could have said. And instead, he looked at himself. Why? What have I done or what have I not done to repair what has been broken? I think that's important. He weeps. He has laid down his sword. He's not picking it up anymore. He just wants to heal. And then he does that. That's the other thing that he does. He provides. I will provide for you and for your little ones. This is what's interesting, and I've kind of alluded to this, but when we go out, we try to manufacture our safety, right? I will be safe if I can do these things. It never, ever works. It always backfires on us because the fight or flight gets ramped up. But safety and security that we're so desperate for, all of us can be provided. Joseph is in a position to provide what his brothers and their families need. I will provide what it is you're looking for. The safety that they were lying and manipulating and twisting, oh, we want to be safe, we want to be taken care of, and they're trying. It's not going to work that way. But Joseph gives it to him anyway. It has to be offered. I wonder who in our story, who in our circle, who in our life, God might be calling us to provide security for. This doesn't mean you got to be a prime minister and get rich and control all the GDP of ancient Egypt. It just means we have some ability to offer something to other people that they're all clamoring for. Somebody probably has that ability to offer something to us. Are we walking around saying, give me, or are we walking around saying, here you are? It's just a subtle mind shift. The other thing that Joseph does here in this text that I think is the third thing that the way we can respond is he absolutely refuses to play the part of God. I mean, an utter refusal. They come to him, they're like, don't hurt us. He says, what am I, God? Like, that's his question. Verse 19, don't fear. What am I, in the place of God? I can't judge you. I can't determine. And then he does something that I think is really, really powerful. And this is a famous verse. You probably heard this verse. What you did, you meant for evil. But God did it for good, right? Like, that's what he doesn't say is fawning. He doesn't say, oh, don't worry about it. He names it. He doesn't let it go. Sometimes people say, oh, just forgive and forget. He doesn't forget, but he has forgiven. He's laid down his sword. He's not out for justice. But he also says, yeah, you meant it for evil. But God did it for good. And it's like, he's like, I don't need to know. I don't need to understand. I have laid down my need to be right about these things. I'm going to let God deal with that. I'm going to let God do what God needs to do. As for me, I'm called to be a steward. I have all of this wealth at my fingertips, and I will provide. But he doesn't just sweep it under the rug and pretend that none of it happened. He names it, but then he trusts God with it. When you think about that, I think about Jesus stewarding and trusting, right? Laying down a sword. Of course, he told Peter, right? Put your sword away. There's so much in the Bible about beating swords into plowshares, the ultimate symbol of laying down our sword and caring for things that grow, right? Jesus is really arguably the only person ever to have lived with a full-on right to grab a sword and go after others. Because all of us have hurt others, right? We have meted out our own sense of pain in different ways to different people, right? I'm not comparing apples and apples, but the only person who never caused harm was Jesus. Every right to grab a sword and get his. And instead he stretches his arms out. He says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That's us too. Let's not lose sight of the fact that all of us would be standing in the crowd yelling at Jesus, our Savior, who calls us to be forgiven, to be received, to be loved, and gave his life so that we could enter into that with him, that we could lay down our sword. See, human creatures, you and I, we were never made to bear the sword. That was never the intent. Now, I agree with Faramir. I think Faramir's right? There are things that the sword protects that need to be protected. And there are times that we need to take the sword and fight to protect. But those times should make us weep. Those times are for celebrating. Those times are for, this had to be done and it stinks, right? We actually are made, look back at Genesis 1 and 2, we're made to give life and to heal and to plant seeds in the ground and watch them grow. That's what we're made for. The problem is when we're so busy gripping the sword, we destroy our hands that were made to be healing hands. If we're fighting and gripping and seeking vengeance and justice and anger, and we will bloody up our hands and we won't be able to heal others. That's what Joseph has come to. He's not denying what is true. Yeah, there's evil in the world. My job is to provide, to steward, to love, and to weep, not to go out and lash out and get anger. I think there's something in that, the way we're made to be, what we're called to be. Couple of thoughts that I just wrote down about, well, what can we do? What can we do about this? First question, this is sort of a diagnostic question for all of us. Who is in your windshield's ditch? Right? Somebody has done something, and you are living life just begging to see him in the ditch. Maybe justly so. I don't know. Maybe it's silly. Maybe it's serious. And you can't wait to see him in the ditch. Are you still a shield maiden of Rohan, where you can lash out and get vengeance? Is that what you're after? Now, I'm not suggesting we deny evil. What you did was evil. What they did maybe was evil. Name it as evil. Doesn't mean put them in your passenger seat. Okay? Maybe not. But are you willing to let go and say, God will do what God is going to do? That is not for me. I will care for things that grow. Are we able to do that? I think it helps us become what I believe we're called to be. Another thought I had was, are you, some of us do this, are you manipulating God? The way the brothers manipulated Joseph, right? Do you come to God? I know a lot of us do. Like, God, I'm going to try harder. I'm going to do better. Can you give me this? Right? If I do better, if I never do this again, can I have that? Like, God is, we are so programmed to think that God is some kind of robot in the sky with a calculator that says, okay, you measure up today, here's your blessing. No! God does not want servants. Jesus didn't come and die on a cross so he could have servants who would grovel at his feet. He came for relationship. You don't have to do it. He already did. I'm going to say it again. You don't have to do it. He already did it. We're free. Don't fawn. Come in the kind of freedom that Christ has purchased for us. And the other thought I had was, who are you providing for? One way I see this play out, and this has historically been true, this isn't just true today, but today we live in a world where boomers, Gen X, millennials, we look at Gen Z and we go, oh boy, you guys, you're going to get us in trouble. Right? And that's true throughout human history. I just know that in 500 BC, somewhere in the jungles of South America, there were elders going, oh, these youth these days. It's just always been that way. But here's what I see. I feel threatened. They're going to mess things up. We have to protect our ways from them. We'll take up the sword, metaphorically, and do battle against the younger generation. Now, I'd just like to point out, boomers, millennials, Gen X, something that you should know. Right now, do you know what generation has the highest church attendance in our country? That's right, Gen Z. So before you get all pointy-fingery, they're the ones going. Now, here's the question. Do we protect from them, or do we plant seeds? And do we invest, and do we grow? What if here, Corinth, our older generation said, we're going to host a Saturday lunch. Go talk to Gibson. Sorry, Gibson, I'm throwing you on you. Go talk to Gibson. He'll get all the kids to come to your lunch, and you guys can talk. Just to build relationships. And just to get to know. What if there was something like that? What if we found ways to actually plant seeds, to give life, to care for things that grow? I think this is what we're called to as kingdom people. I think this is what Joseph does. I know this is what Jesus modeled for us. Lay down our swords and to care for things that grow. The kingdom of God is calling for us to be people that care for things that grow. The kingdom of the world is very much calling for us to be people who grab the sword. I guess I'll just leave it at that and let you choose which kingdom you want to belong to. Let me pray for us. Jesus, you have brought us into your kingdom. You have died and risen from the dead. Would you please help us stop seeking ways to protect ourselves? Would you please set us free from our need to live in fear in the world? To stop asking the question, am I loved? And to start answering it to other people, yes, you are. Oh, Jesus, would you free us? Your gospel can indeed set us free. It can change lives. And we pray that you will work a miracle in our hearts today and this week. It's in your name we pray. Amen.